Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Derek Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network, and I'm here in Acapulco for Anarchapulco 2017 with an old friend, somebody I spoke to several times, Mr. Jeffrey Tucker. How you doing, brother?
Good. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
So we heard you speak last night, and you've got a couple more talks coming the weekend.
Yeah. No, this is a fun conference, right? I enjoyed it last night. I was so pleased to be invited. Jeff Berwick invited me at the last minute to be the banquet speaker last night, and right, I really did it. I enjoyed that talk a lot. It was fun. A great opportunity. I got to talk about money and freedom.
Money, freedom, and I think you also made a few points that are really timely with what we're dealing with as far as the freedom movement, liberty movement as a whole in the Trump era now.
It's a different era. We're dealing with different challenges. I don't think we were well prepared for it. For a long time, I think most of our lives we've habitually believed that the only threats are from the left, and we were ill prepared to see what Trump represented. Now, as you know, I spent 18 months trying to warn people.
I think it was June 2015 that. Yeah. I don't know if it was originally published on Newsweek, but I know it got picked up.
Yeah, the Newsweek picked it up, and I tried to explain where this guy was coming from because I'm pretty steeped in the works of Ludwig von Mises, and Mises experienced these guys. I mean, there's nothing new about this fascist mentality, or for that matter, the neo-Nazis or the hard right. Mises dealt with it in Vienna, and he had to flee them. He was sitting in Vienna. He's a Jew and a liberal, as they called themselves then. Looked out the street and saw young people marching up and down the street calling death for the Jews. And he realized at some point he had to get out of there. So he left his home. Moved to Geneva, chased out by the brown shirts, essentially. Right-wing form of totalitarian ideology, and thank God, because otherwise he would have been eventually rounded up, put in a ghetto, and then put on a cattle car and taken to a death camp.
And who knows what kind of brilliant ideas we would have missed out on.
So Mises wrote a lot about fascism and neo-Nazism, and that generation in the 1940s read all of his works, and they understood it. But unfortunately, that wisdom has sort of hopped over generations, like people have forgotten what he said. So they weren't prepared for Trump when he came along. Trump's a little bit clownish and everything, but his basic ideological structure is very interwar fascist. Protectionism, immigration restrictions, religious intolerance, authoritarianism, imagining himself to be smarter than everybody else, running the country, badgering business left and right. It's all just part of a model. Well described by Hayek, Mises, John T. Flynn. I read about it. I blew the whistle. They put me in opposition with a lot of libertarians who've been very naive about what was coming. I mean, you've got a guy over here that is proclaiming the glories of press censorship, telling business they can't outsource, use their property the way they want, they can't hire who they want, and because Trump says, well, look, I'm going to deregulate. I'm going to cut taxes,
He throws a couple of things.
And libertarians are like, panting like dogs after the dude. It's like, what?
Not to mention a heavily militarized, essentially police state border that he's calling for.
Yeah. Which we're experiencing more and more every day. I've told the story, coming into the country. Yeah. Last night I talked about this, just like about to board the airplane, having already gotten through the ticket, taking a lady, and, everything was fine. Stopped by two U.S. Marshals who gave retina scans of every single passenger, and that's never happened to me in my life. Yeah. And that happens just after Trump liberalized the rules for the Department of Homeland Security. I don't want to say liberalized. He gave them more tools to work with. It's presumably to use against immigrants. And
that's where it starts.
Deportation, but whatever you can use against immigrants, you can use for emigrated, spelled with an E. You can stop your own citizens from leaving. And I had a profound sense, first time in my life, that I had a profound sense that, oh my God, I live in a prison state. If it's that simple, they can keep you from leaving the country with one bureaucratic decision. That is a totalitarian government. I'm sorry to say it.
No, I think you're 100% right about that. And so that's some of the things I want to get into today center around how these, the Trump's rise, which really, I try to be optimistic, as you always, I think, help me remember.
And I've tried to be optimistic about Trump.
You gave a good speech last night as far as these are the dark times we're dealing with, but there's, you can't extinguish the flame of liberty. Yeah. And I feel like if we can, as short attention span as most people have, you go back to June of just last year before the election, and the DNC and the RNC were both facing lawsuits from people who didn't want Trump, who didn't want Hillary Clinton, and it's only after time people, okay, we'll play the two-party system. So it's like, and now they're not really that happy. Now they're.
I mean, Trump spoke at CPAC a couple of days ago.
I saw that.
And saying a bunch of just terrible things. People cheered him.
So why do you think then we're seeing the freedom movement, the liberty movement, starting to be divided amongst itself?
I think it's been divided for a while, and in fact, I think those divisions are starting to heal in the sense that most of the people who weren't really ever with us are now going full AltRight, and they're revealing their true hand.
It seems like a lot of people attribute Ron Paul's 2008 and 2012 campaigns for bringing them into the movement, and it was a broad movement at that point. It seems like we had the central uniting factor, maybe Ron Paul can change things, but there was those who may be more conservative on the side and those who were maybe a little more liberal in the sense that, that we understand it. And now, though, with Trump kind of in this creation of the alt-right, those who were on the conservative end are getting pulled further that way. Yeah. And then we have this just sort of idiotic attack on people like yourself and others who for what I can tell, are just remaining principled and now getting labeled libertarians.
I know. I get
cucks
this every day. It's so funny because we're all on Twitter. I guess I don't know if you're on Twitter, but that's where it gets really, really bad. The people will just write me. They'll just go, look, how come you've become an SJW, which stands for Social Justice Warrior, which is supposed to be like this left-wing thing. How come you've become a left-wing social justice warrior? And I look at it, and I look at their accounts, and they're retweeting Trump, they're retweeting Nazi tweets. Some of them have Nazi insignia for their avatars.
Or just drive over the protester. Really extreme positions.
Yeah, and I'm listening to these people call me a leftist, and I'm thinking, one of us has changed, and it's not me. I've just held the same views I always have held. It's just that you guys have moved so far right, you can't even recognize it anymore. I think they're sincere, but they're dabbling in what I think is basically a demonic ideology, essentially.
You've been around the movement for, a number of years. You've seen elections come. Is this anything that you've seen in the past, though? This sort of division or shifting of the.
Well, so I began to tell you honestly, I began to suspect that something was going wrong as early as 2008. I wondered because a lot of people rallied around Ron Paul not because they believed in liberty, but because he was against the establishment or against the left or against the Federal Reserve, and all that's good. That's good, but they didn't have a deep commitment to a positive vision. It's not enough just to hate.
Yeah,
you have to have a vision of what you think the good life looks like, and a lot of these people just never did, and so they were easy pickings for this tin pot dictator to come along.
You hit on a point that I think is a good segue to the next topic I want to talk about, which is the International Students for Liberty Conference. So we're going to get into along with this Trump rise and alt-right, there's people like this Richard Spencer guy who have now been given an audience, and a lot of that audience is people that label themselves libertarian. Whether or not I think they fit that is debatable, but I was watching, I decided before I came to the conference, I'm like, all right, well, you know what? People are saying, no, you got him all wrong. Like, you need to actually listen to what he says. So somebody sent me a video, and it was left libertarian, and they put in, quote, libertarian versus, true libertarianism or something like this. And that's this position that they're trying to stake out and say that, no, we are the true libertarians.
The Spencer people are claiming that
they are the, and this
absurd.
He was specifically, there's a guy, Richard Heathen, who is the interviewer. I don't know much about him, but he was interviewing Richard Spencer, and it was all about the incident between you two. And when I'm listening to them and kind of dissecting this,
I've not heard any of this stuff. I haven't.
Well, when I'm listening to him, towards the end, both of them said exactly what you're saying. This guy said, the interviewer was like, well, I got into libertarianism. I like Ron Paul, and if you watch some of my old videos, I still stand by some of those positions. They're making excuses, but he says, but I actually like Trump, and you know why? Because I hate the media, and I hate John McCain, and I hate these people, and Trump stands, and that's the thing, is they have hate in their hearts.
That's it.
And somebody can easily step in and make them feel empowered, like, oh, he's taking that on all the people I hate. They don't have a value for love, which is what liberty and libertarianism, for me, it's like, oh, I thought this is a value and ethic that's going to bring us to a world that love can be fostered, and peace and all these beautiful things.
Yeah, of course, no, and these are the ideals we hold, but those are not the ideals held by the alt-right. And these people like Spencer and people like Steve Bannon and the Trump administration, they represent a very different ideology. It's a different tradition.
Absolutely.
And it is a tradition, but it's not our tradition.
I don't, and he labeled himself, the interviewer said, I'm a libertarian nationalist. And,
right.
Spencer,
I think they're just trying to steal the term. I think it's really a cynical attempt. Their actual intellectual godfathers are people like Carlyle and Spangler, Madison Grant, and Oswald. Well, I mentioned Oswald Spengler, but George Lincoln Rockwell, the American Nazi from the interwar period, Father Coughlin, the Nazi priest from the 1920s and 1930s, and Oswald Mosley from Britain, and the fascist literature, from Giovanni Gentile in Italy, and the fascist dictators like Franco in Spain. I mean, there's a long tradition of these jerks, these strong men. Racial nationalists, religious nationalists, people who don't believe in liberty. Yeah. They think that you need a central plan. And they imagine the whole world is just one big war, and they want to join it, on one side, and have a good, hard, old-fashioned ethnic conflict. But liberty means something completely different. I mean, we discovered liberty some 500 years ago, and we discovered it through religious liberty. It was the first liberty. I mean, the religious wars had gone on for hundreds of years. And finally, a few people had an idea, these battles are getting very costly. What if we just let people believe whatever they want? How would that work? So they tried it, and what do you know? It worked.
Yeah,
and
freedom
everybody
works.
and everybody got better. Like the Catholics could be really Catholic, the Protestants could be really Protestant, and they could trade with each other. And actually, in medieval Spain, we saw it too, with Islam, Judaism, Christianity simultaneously existing, to their mutual betterment. And that doesn't mean they have to give up their tradition. It just means that you have to respect each other's human rights to practice their belief. That's
Absolutely.
all. That's pretty simple. But anyway, that's not what these people believe. They think you need a homogeneous society where everybody is marching in lockstep in some militarized way behind some forceful leader. I can't even imagine a view of the world that's less libertarian than that.
Absolutely. And, I do want to make it clear that I think that we both would agree in a stateless, truly free society, individuals who wanted to voluntarily associate and form their communities, and maybe they say, okay, only Christians here, whatever, that would exist.
Well, there are many communities like that in this country today.
But what these people are calling for, this AltRight, is something much more authoritarian and... Despite the fact they try to couch it in euphemisms and they're, I mean, I'm not going to say racist because I know they immediately are triggered by that word, but they're definitely, the words I've seen them refer to themselves as ethno-nationalists, white nationalists, these type of things, and it doesn't signal freedom for people outside of this little category.
No, and freedom tends to bring people together. That's what they hate about it, actually. They don't like freedom because under freedom you have an incentive to deal with everybody and get along with everybody, and freedom extracts value from people, then encourages people to get along with each other. That's what they hate about it. They don't want people to get along. They want people to feel a sense of pride in their race, and hatred for everybody else. And that's not what markets do. That's why ultimately they always turn against markets. I think about the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis in the early 1930s. They didn't start off with legal disparagement against Jews. They just urged Germans not to deal with Jewish shopkeepers or go to Jewish doctors. Or they asked them to stand out in front of synagogues and grocery stores with anti-Jewish signs. They didn't urge violence. They said, don't ever touch them, but just exclude them. Well, it didn't work. It didn't work because ultimately if you're sick and you want to get well and the doctor's a Jew, you're going to go to him, So markets are just that way. So that's when the Nuremberg Clause came along, 1934. And they said, okay, well, look, the market didn't work. Your voluntary segregation didn't work. The Jews are still a problem. Now we're going to make it illegal. So that's what these guys are hitting. They call themselves ethno-nationalists. They claim they want people to just segregate voluntarily. Yeah, okay, what if they don't?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is there does seem to be some implied force. Before we get into your in your own words, recounting the Spencer thing, I want to just ask your opinion on this, because this is something that I've been debating these folks with, I try to expend as little energy as possible, but every now and then, let me see if I can engage and if there's something to learn. Yeah. And so I ask them to clearly define their terms, because we see a lot of this reference to Western civilization, Western values.
Right.
So I had a conversation yesterday. Can you define Western? Like, which specific you just mean in the Western Hemisphere? Which countries fit into your term Western? And then how do you define this term that comes up to me that I think is problematic, white? It's not a race, it's a color of skin or a pigment or something, but there's no ethnicity that's white, there's no race of...
Well, you know what's funny about this? Nowadays, we think of as being white as being inclusive of, say, Italians, Irish, and Jews.
But that's not what these people are meaning when they...
They may mean that. I don't know, but I tell you, if you go back a century ago, you look at all the eugenic literature, somebody like Madison Grant, who wrote The Passing of the Great Race, he wasn't talking about the Irish. I mean, he wanted to exclude the Irish and the Italians, and especially the Jews, because he thought they were the wrong kind of white people. He only wanted the Anglo-Saxon American stock, basically Protestant Northeastern German-descended stock. That's what they considered to be white. So it wasn't, you're right, even back then, when they would talk about white people, they weren't really just talking about white people. They were talking about a special ethnicity and a special religion and a special social class, which they consider to be white.
That's what it seems to be, because when I pressed them a little bit, so Western nations, one of the responses I got was North America, but they didn't say Mexico. They said Canada, the U.S., Australia, England, essentially all the British Crown, empire nations that, and so this is where they're deriving their Western values from. And I asked them, well, what about, accomplishments by Eastern civilization? What about, all the great accomplishment and rich culture of Persia and Egypt and Libya and these kind of things? And they vaguely refer to the Middle East. I asked them to define what the Middle East, which nations they mean by that, and they can't give me any clear thing.
And then you could ask them about what do you think about Africans? Of course, they represent in many ways the worst of the worst as far as these racial nationalists are concerned. But look what happened. 350 years ago or something, slave traders went and captured a bunch of Africans, put them in cages, dragged them over here, and sold them. And we populated the country with these slaves to do all the work. And then, the conscience got to us, the liberal movement eventually argued for the abolition of slavery. We got it. And then what happened? Look over the course of the 20th century. Who would say that the African-American community in America hasn't been the primary contributor to culture in America and every area of American life? Black folks in this country have just been nothing short of unbelievably awesome. Can you even imagine what America would be today were it not for the contribution of the African-American community? It's inconceivable. So they're wrong. They're just wrong about everything.
There's really no, I just don't see there's not much of a strong foundational to it. And again, for those out there who may share this view, please, comment below. What does white mean to you? What does Western values mean to you? And what I've got is, Western civilization, it values individualism, it values free markets and capitalism, and you won't find this in the Middle East. This is what they're saying. So those nations which don't understand freedom are incapable of understanding it, we shouldn't allow them in.
I don't believe this. I think the longing for freedom is universal.
I agree.
And what's weird to me too about this is that you get these people on the alt-right saying, look, non-whites don't value freedom, so we're going to have to install a totalitarian government to keep them out. Wait, who doesn't value freedom here?
Yeah.
Come on. Do you want to take away our freedom to protect our freedom?
Absolutely.
Freedom is a real thing, and it involves freedom of movement, universal rights, liberty for me, liberty for you, liberty for everybody. They want to take away our liberties in the name of protecting them. It's amazing.
I think it goes back again to this sort of hate that they display. They kind of become aware of the power systems that exist, the state and all this, and without taking that energy of awareness, it becomes this heaviness and this anger. And to me, it goes back to they're afraid, whether they're afraid of people of different colors, different backgrounds.
It's also there's an element of immaturity there too, because to reflect on the merit of one's biology or skin color is a very rudimentary, low
primitive,
level.
Basic.
It's primitive and basic. It's maybe the first thing you think, at the age of puberty or something like that, but presumably as you mature, you start to develop ideals a moral sense, a certain imaginings of possibilities beyond just merely identity. You know, that's a very low level thing, and it's not enough to sustain civilization. That's the thing. They claim that they want to save civilization. They're dragging it down.
They're trying to preserve it by keeping the family and all this. Well, let's get into the whole incident, because there's been, the internet was ablaze.
I know.
And I sent you the message afterwards when we've been traveling Mexico for the last 2 weeks, so I haven't been paying attention. I get a message from John, my co-author, and he's like, I've never been more proud of Jeffrey.
Oh, that is so sweet.
And
I've got a lot of messages like that, and I appreciate it. Look, the first thing to say is that I never intended this to go, of course, all over the planet Earth.
Yeah.
It was just, it was a distinct thing that happened at one time, in one place. I needed to act.
Yeah.
It was very important. The ISFLC had put together a very beautiful conference, and there were 1,300 people there. A lot of investment, a lot of work went into it. Planning and scheduling and bringing in speakers. There's a lot at stake. I was downstairs, and I heard that this guy was upstairs claiming to be holding a separate session for ISFLC. And I thought, I imagine, because I know there were a lot of reporters at the Washington Post, Salon. Slate, everybody was at this conference, reporting on the conference, and I thought the last thing we need, and it would be a horrible thing for ISFLC, for the Students for Liberty, for the headline to be, Richard Spencer engages students at SFL, and that would just be a horrible thing. And I knew he was trolling the conference. I mean, he showed up to cause trouble. And in my experience of dealing with with people like this, you have to be decisive, you have to be fast, you have to be firm, and you have to tell them, you're not welcome here. Your views do not represent our views. You were not invited, and that's it. Just make a really clean statement. So I marched up there with that intention. I walked down the hall, up the escalator, across the hall, and as soon as I got there, of course, things had gotten more and more intense. I wasn't there for everything that happened, but the crowd kind of opened up, and I just looked at him and I said, "Fascists like you are not welcome at an anti-fascist conference." And I told him the last time you tried to hold your own conference, it just attracted a bunch of losers making Nazi salutes. Mm-hmm. And, so now you're trying to crash our conference. We don't appreciate it. So that's what was reported. Mm-hmm. And I was proud of that, because the headline the next day, instead of Richard Spencer addressed his students at ISFLC, was Richard Spencer kicked out of ISFLC. Now, I didn't personally kick him out. All I said was I made my clean, clear statement. It was short, strong. And I went and got a beer, and that was the end.
So that was there was no back and forth between the two of you?
Well, yeah, he was, he threw some insults at me, and said that he used to read my works or something like that, but I wasn't going to engage him. This is the way these trolls work. Anybody who's ever moderated an internet forum knows how trolls work. You don't want to feed them. Yeah. So I didn't want to feed him. I just wanted to make a clean statement to him, but also to the crowd that was involved there.
He in that interview I was referencing, he said something along how sensitive people were, that when he held that talk, he's like, maybe I got a little too comfortable and I threw a salute up, but it's no big deal.
He's a Nazi. So this is the guy,
white nationalist.
Well, but I tell you, it's funny when you ask him. These people, there's, they have one thing they say in private, another thing they say in public. So if you ask him, hey, are you a Nazi? He will say something like, look, Nazism was for a certain time and a certain place. That is not our time and our place. Which is a weird answer, actually. That's a weird answer. Basically, he's hinting very strongly that he thinks something like Nazism is not as bad as you may think. And I just don't. I mean, these kinds of trolls, I just don't think we need them in our ranks. I don't want to shut down his free speech rights. I do think the hotel was right to ask him to leave. By the way, I did not call the police, contrary to what people online are claiming. That's just utter nonsense. I went and had a beer. The hotel decided that they didn't want him around either, so they asked him to disperse, and he asked for an escort out, apparently, out here. Mm-hmm. And he was gone. I was proud of the way things turned out in the end. I don't know, people like that, people that try to crash the party, that just try to make a mess of things. They take other things that people are trying to create and try to ruin them. Mm-hmm. They just annoy me.
So, on that note with him, in the same interview, this is funny. You know how some people in this movement, they'll refer to themselves as Big L or Little L?
Yeah.
He said, I don't think Trump is a national socialist, big N, big S, but he might be a small N, small S national socialist. And when the interviewer asked him, put it in your own words, Richard Spencer, what if you have power tomorrow, what's the world you're creating? His answer, something akin to the Roman Empire.
Really?
That's his vision of what he would like to have.
God, there's a lot of slaves.
That's what I was thinking. Is
big welfare state, a lot of militarism, a lot of empires, and a big government with a Caesar. That's not the world we want. In fact, liberalism, as we understand it, came about in opposition to that. So, we need to understand this. Part of me is glad that the alt-right has become so aggressive and open about what they believe, because I think libertarians need to begin to define themselves, at least in opposition to that. It's a truism in our world that we're neither left nor right. Well, we need to start taking that really seriously and understanding what that means. We believe in human liberty, which means believing in universal rights and universal dignity for all people. Free movement, free speech, freedom of religion, respect for everyone. That's the ideal. I remember when I first encountered an early version of this alt-right people, I was with Mary Rothbard, and we were at a meeting. It was a kind of like a powwow or just a get together in Illinois, I think it was. And we were meeting with some of these what were then called paleoconservatives. It later became the alt-right. And after an hour, I was very young. And I was myself not too clear on what their positions were. They seemed to oppose the warfare state and the welfare state, and I thought, well, isn't that enough? And I sat down with Murray after the first session, and Murray said to me, Jeffrey, we can never work with these people. I said, really, Murray, why? Because they don't believe in any universals. They think everything is tribal and biological, and they don't believe in truth. And they certainly don't believe in human rights. And my experience suggests that it'll never work. I was shocked to hear him say that.
Did he ultimately support paleos through Pat Buchanan's presidency?
Well, that's what's funny about it. It's like those were his first instincts. I don't think he stuck with them. He later got a little bit worn down. Because this is in the last few years of his life. He got a little worn down and began to kind of put the best spin on it that he possibly could. It was always a little unclear to me how much of his heart was in it. Because after all, he had spent 40 years fighting the left and the right, And there was a time in the 60s where he thought he could get along with the left, and he kind of, joined the Students for Liberty.
That's my favorite period of history, the late 60s.
Right. And then he got frustrated with them because they didn't believe in private property, And so Murray was a very energetic and creative fellow that took a lot of risks. And I think this end of life sort of dalliance with the right was a little bit of a risk that he was taking. One I don't think he was entirely happy about, but one that he went with because he enjoyed adventure. But I'm just telling you that his first instincts, which he told me privately, was that we could never work with these people.
Sure. That's good to know.
So, I think maybe this is the first time I've ever told anybody this, actually. I've never mentioned that before, but that's what he told me private. And I was a little shocked, you can imagine, because I was, pretty young and a little naive.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand, well, why not? It's true they're not really libertarians, but don't they have a lot of libertarianish ideas? Murray wouldn't have it. He just said, look, I just smell a rat here.
They were a little more libertarian than the neocons.
That was, I think, And so he went along with that, later, and he did support Pat Buchanan because he wanted to see Pat disrupt the political system. And I'm the first to tell you, he wrote some things he shouldn't have written in those years.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is, and this is getting to the last question, and we'll be done for today, is that I've seen some of the alt-right people refer to those last years of his life as evidence of why this is a Rothbardian position.
Yeah.
And
I don't think that that's really fair, because he did have 40 years of writing before then that we have to pay careful attention to, and it's not fair. Like, he wrote so much in favor of free immigration, for example, all throughout the Libertarian Forum. He would attack people for even pulling back slightly on the open immigration question. He endorsed it throughout all of his works. He praised Mises for favoring open immigration. And then he had one sentence in one article towards the end of his life where he had some question about it. And so now the alt-right jumps on that and says, look, Rothbard, agrees with us. I just don't think that's a fair rendering of him. I think you have to look at the whole of Murray. The other thing is, Murray died in 1995. It's 20 years later.
Yeah.
What would Murray be saying about Trump today? I think maybe he would have, by now, already changed his mind again.
So when this thing started to rise, and it's pretty much, I think, my interest in it and research was probably inspired by your first essay
Fascism
on this
article.
Yeah, and so I started to do the research and looking online. It led from things that are, it was known as the Dark Enlightenment, neo-reactionism.
They have so many names.
The AltRight, and it's related. It's connected in some ways to the men's blogosphere, sort of men's rights movement. I drew out this map, kind of connecting.
Oh, you're trying to make sense of it.
And so this is where I'm getting at, is that some of them, though, make their way and start infecting the ANCAP libertarian movement through Hoppe, through Rothbard, and that is their introduction into that. And so I started looking, I'm like, wow, this is the way, because I was like, how do these people connect? And that was the only connection I could see, is that some of them had maybe read a little bit of Rothbard, probably in that time period, had read some of Hoppe, so they've sort of got some ANCAP economics, and then they take the rest of it and go this alt-right. How do you feel now, like seeing people that you've worked with, and many of us have paid attention to, like Molyneux, Rockwell, going further? I mean, these are friends of yours and people you've known for years.
Listen, I have to tell you, it's very painful for me to watch it all happen, especially since I was there at the time, and I did so much hard work to prevent it. I worked so hard for so many years to refocus the libertarianism, to get the liberty part really right. And I struggled. I was in the midst of all this stuff, and I tried ultimately, but I failed. I think there was the bad part of Hoppe, the bad part of Rothbard. It's ultimately prevailed among a certain community. I still think it's a distortion, actually. Hoppe, for example, in 1985 wrote a brilliant book called Theory of Socialism and Capitalism. His chapter, called Conservative Socialism, is a massive attack on fascism. And that's also part of his legacy. I think what we do have to remember is that nobody is infallible in this world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that the only thing that's infallible are principles, and dedication to ideals. That's what we need to follow instead of following particular thinkers.
Absolutely.
We can learn from people. With regard to the alt-right, I think the best teacher is Mises. He wrote a book called Planned Chaos, commissioned in 1947 by Leonard Reed at FEE, where I currently work. He has a whole section on fascism and a whole section on Nazism that bears reprinting. As a matter of fact, I may reprint it sooner rather than later. But he discusses their origin and how they are not liberty. They're also the enemy. We have to fight every form of tyranny, every form of statism.
Authoritarianism, statism comes from all sides, and it seems like this. The movement is definitely experiencing an important moment. I agree with you as far as it's time for those who do care about liberty to make it clear where we stand,
what it is we believe in,
and what we're not. What doesn't represent us.
I think that's right. The funny thing is that lesson that you just mentioned, about certain ideals, I learned those from Murray. To some extent, I learned them from Hoppe. And when your heroes, blink from time to time, that doesn't mean you have to blink with them.
Absolutely.
You still have to adhere to the principles. And I believe that we can look forward to a world of liberty. I don't think that Trump's going to end it. I don't think the world's going to collapse in flames due to the alt-right or the alt-left or anybody else. Liberty's got too strong a foothold, I think, in the world today through distributed networks and the technologies that we're using now, and it's rising around the world. I feel like it's almost as if we have to go through this final phase of right-wing authoritarianism in a sense to see what's wrong with that too. And we're starting to see it. We're feeling it every day. Trump, he may throw some bones at us from time to time with some deregulation or something. I don't know. But mostly what we're dealing with is, what strikes me is it's looking very, very much like the rise of one-man dictatorship. I felt like I experienced it on the plane coming over here. It was very grim. I felt like a prisoner in my own country, having my retina scanned, by the U.S. Marshals. I mean, who needs that nonsense? It comes about as a result of the immigration controls. Everybody's going to suffer. Everybody will suffer. I predict to you that over the next 2 years, many of the people that went alt-right are going to come back home again.
Let's hope so. And I definitely agree on the consistency. That's why I really support and try to emphasize the lessons that Samuel Konkin was extending, which is he has a quote saying the most important action a libertarian can do is to point out the inconsistencies of status and to remain principled. And I think that's...
Konkin was a great man. I'm glad you always bring him up. Konkin and Karl Hess are neglected thinkers, I think, in the liberty space. We need to return to their works, too.
Hopefully the next book can help bring those work up. Thank you for your time, Jeffrey.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Okay.